So thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm Dana Mastriani from the Rockport Library. We're pleased to have Brian Massa tonight, offering this program of our 3-month RV journey. Really looking forward to it. I will ask everybody to stay muted, and we are recording the program. A little bit of background on Brian and the program. Amherst, New Hampshire residents Brian and Dawn Massa traveled to the Pacific Northwest in the summer of 2019. During this trip, they learned about van life, and their interest in RV travel was sparked. When they returned home and they began their search for an RV and committed to travel across the country. In May of 2020, they purchased a truck and a travel trailer. And in 2021, they departed New England and headed west. During their travels, they drove 11,000 miles, driving through 19 states, visiting 12 national parks. They are currently planning their next trip, which will take place sometime in 2022. So join us as they share their travel experiences and photos from their 3-month cross-country RV trip. Just a little shout out, if I could tonight. This program has been generously sponsored by the Friends of the Rockport Library. So Brian, I will now turn it over to you. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Dana. And thank you for the library for hosting this event and sponsoring me for this presentation. This is certainly a topic that I am extremely passionate about and enjoy very much. So if there's any questions, as Dana mentioned, please put them in the chat. I'm more than happy to answer any questions throughout the presentation that are relevant, and certainly those at the end. I know for us, when I say us, I mean my wife and I, we fell in love with RV travel, as Dana mentioned, in 2019. And I'll kind of go through that decision process and how we got to where we did. And as Dana mentioned in the intro there, that in 2021, we made our first trip. We purchased in 2020, and we also just came back from our second trip, which we did in 2022. So we've made 2 cross-country trips in the last 2 summers, 3 months at a time. So there's a lot to share and a lot of beautiful places to see in this country. So let's get right into it here. And I assume you can see my mouse. So I'm just going to point out a couple things. As I mentioned, this is our 2021 trip. And my wife and I went on this trip over that period of time in the summer. I'll give the specific details. I do have an Instagram page where I just share pictures of our trips and different destinations. So if you're interested in checking that out, certainly check out the Instagram. And I do have a website, savvytraveler.com, which is basically a blog that I started and covers basically all of the material that we're going to cover tonight, all the places in a lot more detail with locations as well as restaurants and hikes and so on. So feel free to check that out. So let's go over the agenda here. Here's the agenda. I'll talk about our timeline. I'll talk about our destination en route, pictures of the journey, resources that I've used to plan our trip and find campgrounds and so on, and then address any questions at the end, or certainly as they come up that are relevant to a specific slide. Actually, here in this particular slide, this is our first campsite that we ever stayed at in Swansea, New Hampshire, at the Ashlat River Campground. So we purchased our camper in the summer, or excuse me, in April of 2020. So here's the decision and timeline. It was, as Dana mentioned, it was 2019 that my wife and I went out west to visit our son in Washington State. And while we were with him, a lot of his friends were into van life, actually living full-time in a van itself. And I was very intrigued, not really familiar with that type of lifestyle. So it got me thinking about just travel in general. And while we were there in the summer of 19, we traveled through Olympic National Park. And for some reason, I just happened to notice now at that point, lots of campers. So when we got home from that trip, I thought about, is this something we can do? I saw a video that I watched on a plane as I was traveling for business called The Far Green Country. And it was about a couple who quit their jobs, bought an RV and traveled. So between my son's van life friends and watching that, I was really intrigued. And I talked to my wife about it, and she's like, hey, we could do that. But if we're going to talk about it, then we have to definitely do it. So she's held my feet to the fire, and we agreed that we would go forward with this, and we set 2021 as our proposed trip. It was 2020 when we actually purchased our trip, and as you can see here, it was April. And we all know what happened in May of 2020, or excuse me, March of 2020. That's when COVID hit. And then everything just seemed to stop in the world, and we decided we were going to move forward and still stick to our plan. So we did purchase our truck and RV, and probably purchased it just at the right time, because it wasn't much longer after that RV prices started going through the roof, because everyone was looking to do RV travel as a way to get out of the house and see the country. So we bought right at the low point, and then everything went crazy after that. So that year in the summer, we traveled throughout 2020, breaking in, I call it the break-in process. I've never owned an RV, never owned a truck. My wife had RV'd when she was a kid as a family, but I have never done it. So we took that year to break in and get into the process of what it's like to tow. And so we camped throughout New England that summer of 2020. And during that time, we started finalizing a route, determining a route, making reservations throughout 2019 and 2020, because if we wanted to stay in national parks, you needed to really book 6 months in advance, one, to get a site, and within the park, because some of their restrictions or reservation systems open 6 months in advance. And as soon as they open, they book and they fill up immediately. So it was very important to have a plan and get those booked if we were going to do this. And as you can see here, I booked my first reservation May in Moab of 2020. And then I mentioned the national parks needed to be booked 6 months in advance. And then we departed on April 10th of 2021. So we spent a lot of time planning and booking all of our reservations. Actually, this picture here is 2019. So the seed was planted, and we actually bought this is our minivan, a Honda Odyssey. We bought a tent that actually attaches to the back. So we made this kind of like a conversion van tent that we tried it out to get a feel if this is something that we were interested in doing. And sure enough, we did it, and we moved forward. So as I mentioned, we left in April and we returned in July. Here's the day we picked up our camper in Vermont. So we bought it at Exit 1 RV in Fairhaven, Vermont, drove up there. And again, remember, this is May 8th of 2020. So a lot of COVID restrictions. We had to drive up and pick it up and leave that day, because we could not stay anywhere in Vermont, because Vermont was pretty much closed to any outside visitors. So we kind of snuck in, got the RV, and got out. This is a Coachman Freedom Express. It's a 25-foot travel trailer. Our truck's about 20 feet. So in total, it's 45 feet long. And a very exciting day and nervous day at the same time, because I've never towed anything. So I had to get back home with this thing, a 3-hour drive. The camper itself, some people may want to know, it weighs about 6,000 pounds, and our truck can tow about 9. So that's important to know if one is interested in purchasing an RV, to make sure you get the right tow vehicle for the camper that you're looking at getting. This is the inside of our RV. So as you enter the doors back here, and we have a dinette, we have a kitchen, and then in here behind this door is our tiny bathroom, but it's certainly does the job. If you know anything about campers and RVs, this has a separate toilet, a shower, and sink. Some have what's called a wet bath, which is a toilet and a shower in one. And we knew when we started doing our research that it's something we did not want. So we wanted as close to a full bath as possible. So that's what we got. And in the front of the camper, we have a full-size queen that we can actually walk around. Very spacious, lots of light, lots of windows. So we are very pleased with this camper, and fell in love with it. And we feel we're very fortunate to have found what we call our perfect RV, the first time we've ever bought an RV. So that was the RV itself and the truck. So here's our destinations, and these were just determined based on places we wanted to go, places we've been in the past and wanted to go back and spend more time and revisit. So I won't read through all of this, but as you can see, it's pretty extensive. Our first destination was Pawhuska, Oklahoma, and my wife wanted to go there because she's a big Food Network person and she loves to watch the Pioneer Woman. So as we said, we were going to go for 3 months. Why not do whatever we want? And if she wanted to go to Pawhuska, let's do it. And we ended up our last night before we started heading home in Aurora, Colorado. So my aunt lives out in Denver and it was close to her. So that's where we decided our final destination would be. So we filled in all these other destinations as a result, and we'll be going through those in the slide presentation. Here's the map. So as you can see, we covered a lot of miles here from Amherst. We made our way down here into Oklahoma and then journeyed our way up to New Mexico and then into Utah, and then kind of did this loop down into Joshua Tree and up to Lone Pine and as far west as Yosemite National Park before we made our way back home through Arizona, and we kind of wiggled our way back up, doing here like a figure 8. Now that I look at this map, I don't know how I came up with this route, but we crisscrossed and made our way to Ouray, Colorado, and then Aurora before cutting across the country and making our way home. So covered a lot of miles and covered a lot of ground. And for me, one of the reasons and excitement for this RV life was just the unexpected surprises, the journey, seeing new places. This was certainly one of those places in Casey, Illinois. Now, I don't know if anyone's been to Casey, Illinois. This was just a unexpected plan. We stopped in an overnight after traveling all day. And as we pulled into the exit or got off the exit, and prior to that, we started to see these signs about big town, small things. And it turns out that this town was designed to have a lot of these supersized, world's largest, you name it. They had the world's largest rocking chair, world's largest wind chime, antlers, mailbox, golf tee, pitchfork. They have like 10 different items. So we pulled into campground. We were kind of tired. We saw the signs in town, which was 10 minutes down the road. I told my wife, we're going in. We're going to go check it out. So these are all like within walking distance. So it was a fun, unexpected surprise and something that I was hoping to get from this trip. And right off the bat, we did. So that was exciting. And this was all before we hit our first destination, Pawhuska, Oklahoma. And I mentioned home of the Pioneer Woman. So basically what we did in this town was we ate our way through the town. So she has several restaurants, and the main attraction is her store called the Mercantile, which consists of a gift shop and a restaurant. And across the street, she owns a pizza place and an ice cream shop. So we were here for about 2 days. And as I mentioned, we ate our way through it. So you have pictures here of the Mercantile. We had breakfast there. And then across the street, we went to, as you can see here, P-Town for garlic knots, and just as I mentioned, ate our way and basically had a food coma. And while we were there, we basically hit the whole town in one day, and then we took another day. My wife found this tall grass preserve, so we said, let's go check this out and see what it's all about. And this was another unexpected surprise. This is a 39,000 acre piece of protected tall grass prairie. It's one of the largest left on Earth. And here they have 2,500 free roaming bison. And you just drive out onto this dirt road, and if you're fortunate, you get to see bison. And as you can see from that video, we were very fortunate and saw a ton of bison. Neither one of us have ever heard of this. We never knew of this. And this was another unexpected surprise, which we thoroughly enjoyed as we took an afternoon and drove through here and just saw all these free roaming bison that literally could come up to your car and be right there next to you. So that was pretty exciting and a lot of fun. So as I mentioned, we were in Pawhuska for 2 nights before we made our way to New Mexico. And again, I'll point out, so in 2021, COVID was still a big and high cases throughout various parts of the country. Some states were pretty stringent with lockdowns, and New Mexico was one of those states. And actually, one of the campgrounds that we had planned to stay at was had closed and was not open, so we had to reschedule or relocate a different campground to stay at prior to leaving on our trip. But when we got into New Mexico and into downtown, we used the campground as a home base. It was in Santa Fe, and made our way touring Santa Fe for a day, and then headed south one day to Albuquerque. And there were a lot of restrictions. A lot of either stores were closed, or certainly within the center of each town, Albuquerque and Santa Fe, there were mask requirements and restrictions on stores. So this was a little bit of a surprise, but I guess not too bad. We still enjoyed ourselves, and we were still able to do some hiking, see some of the sights. And then I think for us, we managed to eat our way through whatever restaurant was open, and we did enjoy some great food. I'll show that in a minute. So what we have here are pictures of the Laredo Chapel, and they're known for this spiral staircase, which is a particular, there's no screws, no nails, all perfectly fitted together with wood. We also did some hiking, and this is a hike that we took overlooking Santa Fe, and then this is Old Town in Albuquerque that you see there on the bottom right. And then it's just more of the town. This is Cathedral Basilica in Santa Fe, and then this was just some of the fine dining that we got to take in while we were there. And of course, whenever you have Mexican food, you always need, in my opinion, chips and salsa and a margarita. Okay, so from there, we spent probably 2 to 3 nights in the Santa Fe area while visiting Albuquerque, and then we made our way to Utah. So we took stayed overnight one night before we made it. We stayed in Farmington, New Mexico, before we arrived here in Moab, where we stayed for an entire week. And I don't know if you haven't been to New Mexico, or excuse me, to Utah, the Mighty Five is just amazing. We did this trip, and the reason why we added it to our trip again is we had gone here with our children a couple of years prior, and we loved it so much and said, we got to come back. And we did. So when we first came here, we did it in 10 days. This time we did it in this whole area, we did in a month. So we took our time. We stayed a week in Moab, and made our way down to Escalante, and stayed in Capitol Reef, and stayed in Bryce before ending our trip in Utah in Zion. So the Mighty Five are the 5 national parks that you find in Utah. I have them listed here: Zion, Bryce, Capitol Reef, and Arches, and Canyonlands. So those are just 5 national parks, but between that and the state parks, there's so much to do. You have Dead Horse, you have Goblin, Grand Staircase, the Escalante Petrified State Forest, a lot to do here. So thus the reason for taking our time and wanting to spend a month. And we could easily have spent another month more, But this drive, I highly recommend down Route 12. It's just amazing. We'll talk more about that. So in Moab, as I say, so much to see, so much to do. We attempted to drive. This is a dirt road, so and you see it here, but I wanted to just give you an idea. Within Moab, you have Arches National Park and Canyonland, but you also have Dead Horse State Park and a number of other areas that you can go and do hiking and off-roading. And the distance from one area to the other is huge because you have this giant canyon separating. So we actually took a day and drove out to Anticline Overlook, which is this starred point here. And from here, you can look out and see this potash farm, which is this distance here, which is clear across the canyon. So there's no easy way to get there but to drive an hour out to Anticline. But from here, you can see the potash farm from this distance here. And then if you wish, you can take this dirt road and continue down to this area here. There's this road that you might see here. This is the road coming through here. And this is the viewpoint from this point here at Dead Horse State Park. And then you can continue. This is called Schaefer, what's the name again? Schaefer Point Road or Schaefer Road. And then you can come drive out of Schaefer up this canyon and exit out into Canyonland. I attempted to do this, but I only got about from this point here to about here before I turned around with my truck and said, I can't do it. It's a little rough and it takes a long time. It's only 15 miles, but you're going 20 miles an hour or less unless you have the right vehicle. But we saw rental cars driving through here. I just didn't have the guts to do it because this was the beginning of our trip. And I didn't want to destroy my truck and have to turn around and go home. We had a lot more of the country to see, but so much to see and so beautiful. This is Needles and Anticline. I've shown you that star. This is on that prior map. These are the views from that point. So again, we spent a good part of a day here just hiking and taking in the scenery. And here's another view, which is absolutely stunning. And as I mentioned, these dirt roads that you can take if you have the right vehicle, you can drive deep into these canyons. And people were camping back through here. If you have the right equipment, you can dry camp and stay out in Utah. It's just stunning. So Canyonlands is also in Moab. So I mentioned earlier, you have Arches, you have Dead Horse State Park and Canyonlands. So this is pictures of us in Canyonland. This is views from the Grand Point at the very end of the park, where you can have, there's a 2-mile hike that at the top of this rim that you can hike along the edge of the canyon. And you have a plateau down here and then yet another canyon where the Snake River is running through, or I should say it was the Colorado. And some more views here of Canyonland. Here's another stop, and probably one of the most popular spots in Canyonland National Park. This is Mesa Arch. So if you see any pictures of Canyonland, this is the one. So you have the arch right through here, and then you have this opening here looking down into the park. So if you want to get the sunrise picture that everyone shows on Instagram, get here early and you won't be alone. There'll be a big crowd looking for that ideal shot. And then I mentioned Dead Horse State Park. This is the view from Dead Horse, which you pass as you come in and out of Canyonland. So again, I guess the important thing that I truly driving home is in Moab, you have easily a week that you can spend between Arches, Dead Horse, and Canyonland. But the views were absolutely stunning. Matter of fact, our first trip here with our children, I mentioned earlier, we didn't even come to this park because we didn't have time. We did the 5 parks in 10 days. So we didn't have the time, but this time we had a whole week. So we took advantage of that. And this is that Schaefer Road that I mentioned that you can actually drive down through here and drive all the way from Moab into Canyonlands. And of course, outside of the parks are other great hikes. So these are some additional hikes that we did while we were in Moab. This is Bowtie Arch, this is Corona Arch, and this is Fisher Tower. All hikes that are local and close by. And then we spent a day, actually we camped, this was one of the campgrounds where we stayed in the park. So we were 2 nights in Arches National Park, which was absolutely stunning. We stayed in Devil's Garden, and from there we were able to do a lot right from the campground. But this is a Delicate Arch and then Double Arch within the park. And of course, everyone looks for that iconic picture of the Delicate Arch. So you can see everyone here waiting to get the photo, but I'll just show a video. So this is the Instagram before and after. And these are all the people waiting to get their picture there at the arch. So you got to get there early. And this was in April, so this is kind of like the beginning of the season. So actually, at this time of the year, in 2021, you did not need a pass to get in the park, which you did in 2022. And actually in 2021, come 10 o'clock, sometimes earlier, the park was full. So they would close the park and you'd have to wait until they opened it again. And it typically wasn't until later in the afternoon. So just keep those in mind as you hit the national parks. Obviously, they've become very popular with people today. So here's the advantages of staying in an RV and having all your stuff with you. We would typically pack a lunch, and this is at one of the overlooks. This was at Garden of Eden. And we stopped with our truck, we put the tailgate down, had lunch just as this overlook. And then we have Landscape Arch within the Arches National Park. So that was our time there in Moab. Again, we spent a week, and this was in April. Then from there, we were making our way to Capitol Reef. And as we did, we stopped at Goblin State Park for just a few hours and did a little bit of hiking. This was a park that we didn't make our first trip with our kids, and I wanted to hit as we traveled from one location to another. So this is a land formation called the Three Sisters, and then an overlook in Goblin with these land formations that were formed from erosion and so on. And thank goodness you have RV parking. And again, we were making our way from one destination to another. So we stopped for a day to do that hike. And then we made it to Capitol Reef, which is on the way. So Scenic Byway 12 is a highway that we'll get more into that in a minute, but that you'll take through this area. And one of the stops, Capitol Reef, is a must do. We did stay in this state park as well. This one had, I believe we only had electric hookup, or maybe we didn't have any. I think we had electric, but that was about it. So if you're an RVer, we had to fill up with water at the campground, and there was a dump station there. But we stayed only one night, and wish I had stayed longer. But some of the great views that we were able to take in Sunset Point within Capitol Reef, and I mean, these pictures say it all. The colors and sunrise and sunset, the golden hour is just amazing in this area between the rocks and the land formations are incredible. And when you go to Capitol Reef, one of the must stop is Guilford House. So you stop here. It was one of the original homesteads that now has been converted into a little shop that sells local handmade crafts and pies. And they're known for the pies. You got to get there early. The first day we arrived, it was late afternoon and they were all sold out. So first thing in the morning, I was there to grab a pie and enjoy that with breakfast at the campground. So keep that on your agenda. Again, this is Sunset Overlook, and as I mentioned, between sunrise and sunsets, this is a place to be, just absolutely stunning. So we were there just again one night. We did a lot in that one day or full day that we had to explore that area before we made our way to Grand Escalante, or Grand Staircase Escalante, taking scenic byway 12. So and when you take that highway, you drive over the Dixon National Forest, which is pretty incredible. You climb an elevation of 9,500 feet, or we were reached an elevation of 9,500 feet before we came down into Escalante and Boulder. This was an overpass, or excuse me, an overlook that we stopped at as we made our way. And this is Calf Creek Canyon, and you can hike down in here, down over on this far end. You can drive down and you can hike within the canyon. But lots of beautiful scenery as you make your way from Moab into Capitol Reef and then Grand Staircase. And we stayed here for a couple of nights. And this is the scenic byway 12. We were camping down here, and we decided one day to drive out. We saw pictures of Meditate Arch, and we said, well, let's go check this out. It's a 12-mile dirt road in the desert of Grand Staircase. And it took us quite a while to get there. And we were treated to this scenery here of these rock formations and this arch. And the one thing I always joked to my wife about, and before we did any of these hikes, is I'd always say you have to be careful because you could die out here because it's so remote, and there's really no good markers for hikes to put on trees. There's just nothing there. So you have to be very careful. And sure enough, I was laughing. I had to take a picture of this sign because this is the parks sign that says, as I was telling my wife, you got to be careful because you could die out here. Sure enough. So just go with the word of caution is when you do some of these hikes and you're venturing your way out, make sure you come prepared for the heat and the desert hot sun, and bring plenty of food and water, and make sure you know where you are. This is the Meditate Arch, which we had seen pictures of. And the reason why we drove out here is to check this out, to do that 12-mile drive, which took 45 minutes to do a hike out to this arch. And not far from our campground was the Escalante Petrified Forest, which I pointed out very early, where I showed the Mighty Five. We also visited that state park while we were out there as well. And then we made our way to Long Canyon and Singing Canyon, which these are pictures of, which are off of the Burr Trail Road in Boulder, Utah. And what's amazing is this Burr Road Trail, which was in Boulder, you can drive that dirt. It eventually turns into a dirt road and will actually lead you into Canyonland, where we had came from. So again, if you have the right vehicle and have the time, you can do some amazing drives in some amazing areas where you won't find very many people to take in some amazing scenery. So things to consider if one were to take a cross-country trip, and you have the right vehicle. I suppose you could probably rent a Jeep as well, and go deep into the wilderness here in Utah for some amazing sites. So from there, we made our way to Bryce National Park, and this was one of my wife's favorites. She loved this park. We decided we were here for an entire week, so we got to really see this park in its entirety. There's about an 18-mile road that dead ends in the park at one of the final trails called Rainbow Point. So you can drive that 18-mile. You can there's plenty of overlooks in the park. So if you ever plan on coming to Bryce National Park, you don't necessarily have to hike it. There's plenty of places to pull over and do overlooks and get amazing sights. But certainly I would encourage a hike because the views are incredible. This is Thor's Hammer, one of the landmark sites, and the hoodoos that you can see from the overlooks. And this is one of the hikes that we did. I'll point that out here in the next slide. So here is this red line represents a road with bus stops that you can get from town. but we actually hiked this trail here down into the canyon and then up out. So we started out here at Sunset Point, hiked down, and these are some of the destinations. So I pointed out Thor's Hammer, which is here, hiked this famous, in an Instagram worthy shot here, where you're coming down into the canyon, and then you have two bridges, and then you have Queen Victoria as you make your way up out, and then some other pictures as you climb up and exit out on Sunrise Point. So at a minimum, if you can, and if you visit the park, certainly this would be one hike I would strongly recommend. And actually in this particular route, because you have your descent here is 520-foot drop, and then only 321 coming out in this particular area. So if you're going to do the big drop, you'd rather do it coming down than going up. So, and then you can hike just along this rim, and then from this rim trail you can get these amazing views of the hoodoos. And I'll show you here. This is one of the pullovers that you can stop at. This is Bryce Point, which we did at sunset. And like everything in Utah, when the sun starts to set and the colors on the rocks, this was absolutely stellar. So after a week staying there and visiting and hiking and taking in the area, we headed to Zion National Park. We actually stayed outside of the park for a few nights, and then we stayed within the park for a few nights. And as you can see, the landscape's starting to change a little. You have some greenery, trees, and this park was a bit of a challenge again due to COVID. Here, actually, you had to get a pass to get into the park, or at least to ride the bus. And the only way you can get into the park is via these buses. So we were only able to get two passes, one at early in the morning and one later in the day on two separate days. And it made it a bit of a challenge to do the park. But we did do it a couple of years ago prior with our kids. So we enjoyed what we could, but I'll be honest, that it was a challenge. I don't think they didn't have those requirements in 2022, but in 2021, it was a bit of a challenge. And we hiked the famous trails. This is the Narrows, where you actually hike in the water in the riverbed. So this can be a challenging hike. As you can see, this is my wife making her way through the water here. The water was kind of high this day. As you make your way on this trail, there's lots of warning signs about flash floods, because as you could imagine, if you had rain, this can get rather treacherous and dangerous, which I'm trying to point out here in this picture. So this was May 19th when we did a hike. I took a picture of the RV lot from one of the trails that we were on. And then here it is, just a little over a month later, the same year, there was a flash flood. And this parking lot, this is the parking lot, the photos that I found on June 29th of 2021. So the Virgin River flows right through this area here, and they had a flash flood, and it just took out the whole parking lot. So if you do go to Zion, that's one of the things, and certainly everyone's going to want to do the Narrows. So that's one of the things you have to be aware of. And then this is just a picture from Watchman Trail while we were doing some hiking. And then this is the top of Angel's Landing. This is got to be the most iconic hike in Zion. In 2022, actually, and moving forward, I believe you have to get a permit to hike this. It's pretty intense, not for everybody, kind of a little scary. This is actually photos when we did it the first time with our children. And the trail comes, well, you make it to this point and you have this incredible view. And this is as far as I could make it. And then my wife and my boys continued up this trail, up all the way up to the top. And there's probably 1,000-foot drop. And there's chains that you hold on as you make your way up. And it's very crowded, thus the reason for permits now, but it's the most iconic hike in Zion National Park. with the Narrows being the second, and for stunning views of the park. I can understand why. As I mentioned, we stayed a couple days outside of the park, and we decided to explore Grafton, which is an old ghost town, or actually currently a ghost town. Last residents moved out in 1945, so they have a nice preserved area of this last settlement or ghost town within Grafton, which is only probably 10 minutes outside of Zion. So if you have time and you make it out to Zion National Park, be sure to check out any other hikes to do outside of Zion, because there's so much to do and so much to see just even outside of the park. And this only just scratches the surface, because there is another entrance to the park on the far western side that we did here, but due to time, I don't have the time to cover all of that. So now we made our way, making our way to Joshua Tree from Zion. So we stopped overnight in Barstow, California, and this was a road stop, I guess, treasure attraction diner that I had found, thankfully, via Google Maps. Well, Google Maps, you can find just about anything. And this was a popular destination, and we enjoyed a nice meal here. I will say, as we made our way from Zion into Barstow and then into Joshua Tree, as a RV hauling a camper, they were calling for wind gusts of 45 miles an hour. So this was a very challenging day, and I was thankful that we got to Barstow when we did, because the winds were really, really picking up. We thought we would hike, but there were some destinations that we wanted to go to in Barstow, but we just parked the camper, unhooked the truck, went to get something to eat, and just chilled out the rest of the day, as it was pretty intense from a wind standpoint, and didn't want to be out in those gusts. And as I mentioned, the next day they had more strong gusts. We hit the road early in the morning to try and avoid the late afternoon gusts before we got to Joshua Tree. And here in Joshua Tree, we stayed in 29 Palms, which is just right outside, right near the entrance. So we spent a couple days hiking. This is Skull Rock and Split Rock within Joshua Tree, and we were very fortunate from a weather standpoint. It was, I think, the temperature reached maybe 75 degrees, and that sounds warm, but Joshua Tree can get into 100-degree weather easily. So this was very nice, and we were exploring the rock formations, very different from where we were in Utah, desert, and then all these boulder heaves that were actually, it's hard to explain when you're looking in the desert and you see these big boulders just heaped up out of the ground, and that's literally what you see is boulders that were heaved over years and years and years, thousands of years, just heaved up out of the earth. And you see these boulder formations throughout the park. And of course, the vegetation is pretty incredible. You have the cactuses, a Cholula plant, an Octulo plant, which can reach, 15 feet in height. That's my wife here. So she's 5'6", and as you can see, these things can get very big. And of course, when you go to Joshua Tree, you got to see the Joshua trees, which is not hard to do. They're everywhere. So we took a little dirt road into this area where all the Joshua trees are, and then you can see some more boulder heaves out here, and then some rugged landscaping or landscape. So just a fun way, I have to say. I know I've talked a lot about the different locations, but just what a great way to see the country in an RV and have the opportunity to do it at your own pace. And then, of course, ideally, what was wonderful is at night we would have our own bed to sleep in that we were basically hauling all over the place. We were able to cook our meals. We'd have breakfast in the morning, coffee in the morning, hit the trails early, and then be done early afternoon and be able to come back to the campground and just relax and enjoy the evening. And then have, of course, our nice, comfortable bed to sleep in at night. Now, as we made our way from Joshua Tree, we decided to go into Lone Pine, and this was an area that we decided, this is on the, actually in California, north, if you go north of Palm Springs, and you hit the Sierra Nevada mountain range, and this is actually on the eastern side of the Sierras. And it was a place we had heard of through watching YouTube videos of people who were doing RV travel, and Lone Pine was an area that a lot of people had talked about. So I just had to go check it out. We were here for actually a week, and we made this kind of our home base. This was actually Memorial Day weekend, and little did we know that in Bishop, California, they have what's Mule Days. And that's mule, M-U-L-E, as in the donkey, that they celebrate it's the beginning of the season for hiking and going into the mountains. And the mules over the years have played a big role in bringing in food to the various remote campgrounds. So they celebrate the mule over that weekend. So it was fun to experience that and go into Bishop. They had it's a lot of going-ons there with the Mule Day races and mules this and mule that, but we also did some hiking, and from there we also went to Death Valley. So this here is Movis Arch. This is Lone Pine Peak that you can see through the arch, and then the Sierra Nevadas here and in the background, and Mount Whitney being the highest point in the continuous United States at 14,500 feet. So what was neat is we were here one day, well, we were here for a week where you can see Mount Whitney, and then we went into Death Valley, and you're at negative 282 feet. So you go from negative 200 feet sea level all the way up to 14.5, all in the same area, although it is quite far from one location to another, but it's neat to experience that, which we were able to do. And little did we know, our friends told us about this movie, The Long, Long Trailer, which we had rented prior to coming out on this trip. And little did we know they actually filmed part of it in this area as they drove up Mount Whitney in their RV. So if you're an RVer and you haven't seen The Long, Long Trailer, you just got to watch it. It's hysterical. And while we were here, I didn't know, and as we drove by, we saw signs for Manzanar. And if you don't know, Manzanar is a National Historic Site. It's a World War II relocation center where they put Japanese citizens in these relocation centers during World War II. So this is one of several locations that they had in the United States during World War II. So we went for a tour of that, and then you have the Sierra Nevada mountain range here. And what's amazing is just on the other side of this is where we were headed for the following week as we made our way to Sequoia National Park in Yosemite. So all you have to do is just make it over that ridge, and then you're in the other national parks. So that was pretty neat. And as I mentioned, we went down to from Lone Pine, we made our way to Death Valley for a day. This was a long drive, but one of the most amazing drives from Lone Pine into Death Valley. Very, very remote. And as I was making this drive, You Could Die Out Here was going through my head a lot. So you drive through some very remote areas. So here's Badwater Basin at 282 feet below sea level. And then from our campground, you can see Mount Whitney at 14.5. So that was pretty cool. But here are just several pictures, Badwater Basin, and then Devil's Golf Course. And then here's a look from Dante's Point of Death Valley itself. And this is Zabrisky's Point. So the land formations and so on are just absolutely amazing. And then, of course, you have to get the iconic picture of you in front of the thermometer at 108, which was probably a rather cool day for Death Valley. I think actually before we left, it reached 110. So very fortunate to see this area, and while we did, because this past summer they had lots of floods here. So some of the park was closed for for some time this summer. Hikes that we did in 2021, we watched and saw in the news this past summer. Areas where we drove by, roads were totally washed out because of flash floods that happened this past summer. And then we have the Mesquite Sand Dunes, and then this is Artist's Palette. So different color minerals are what you see here, is where you get the colors in those rock formations. And then this is Badwater Basin, where you can walk out onto the salt flats and check it out. And you have these ranges on either side of the basin. So after making our way from Death Valley and leaving Lone Pine, as I mentioned, we crossed the Sierra Nevadas, which is running up through here, and we were over here on the far right hand side is Lone Pine, and here's Sequoia. So we drove around. So we didn't drive over the range. We drove down around the range and then came up, stayed here in Three Rivers, and visited Sequoia National Park. So if you haven't been to Sequoia National Park, here's a little thing to keep in mind. There's two ways to enter the park. One is where we stayed here in Three Rivers. We had a campground here for several nights, and then we drove up this boxed area, which is quite treacherous. 30-mile-an-hour twisty windy road. It takes a long time to make your way up into the park. So I think I'm trying to see here, we down here in Three Rivers where we stayed, the elevation is like 843 feet. And by the time you make your way up you're up to 6,800 feet within Sequoia National Park. And you don't even begin to see the sequoias until you reach an elevation of just over 5,000 feet. But this was a very challenging way to get into the park. The other way in is up through here, which is a lot easier to get into the park. And you can stay anywhere along here. And I will admit, it is a bit of a drive to get to this point, but it's not as stressful. So if you don't like steep drops, twisty roads, high elevation, looking over the edge of the highway, I wouldn't even call it a highway, the road, you want to come into Sequoia this way. This prevented us from going into the park as much as we wanted. We wanted to go in several times. We only went in twice, just because it was a long drive and very scary for me personally. Maybe you like that stuff, but wasn't for me. But just wanted to point that out because we had no experience and we learned that as we went. But Sequoia is, when you get there, just amazing. I've never seen anything quite like it. So the must-dos in Sequoia, which we didn't get to do Morro Rock, but I hear Morro Rock is incredible. We did General Sherman's Tree, Grant Grove, and then Crystal Cave is another option to do, but that was closed due to COVID, and Crescent Meadow. So we hiked along Congress Trail, which is these big trees here that you see. This is General Sherman's tree, and then this is my wife between two sequoias as we made our way along Congress Trail, which there were a lot of named sequoia trees within the park along that, so I highly recommend that. And then this video here is the Big Trees Trail that we did, which is right, the soil and elevation is right where you for sequoias, so there were many great sequoias along this trail. Stunning and beautiful, and never knew a tree could be that big. And I guess I'm so glad we had the opportunity to do that. And then from there, we made our way to Yosemite National Park. Now, quite amazing. You see pictures and you watch documentaries, but then when you pull into this park and you see upper and lower Yosemite Falls, I was just blown away. Thoroughly enjoyed this park, and I just pictures are one thing, going there is another, and so glad we did. So here we have upper and lower Yosemite Falls, and we have El Cap. This is the trail that leads out. I decided not to take this trail and try and hike up it because it ain't gonna happen, but So amazing. You of course, and you got to watch, was that Free Solo? So watch that and you'll have a better appreciation. And then this is Yosemite from tunnel view overlook. You have Bridal Veil Falls over here. You have El Cap in here in the distance. You have Half Dome. And then one of my favorite hikes was what was the Sentinel Dome. We hiked Sentinel Dome, and then we went we drove out to the end of Glacier Point, and you can get from those two spots almost a 180 view of the entire park. So this is a video where I'll start at Sentinel Dome, and you have El Cap, and as the video goes through, you'll see El Cap, you'll see Yosemite Falls, then Half Dome, which picks up over here, which I filmed at Glacier Point Overlook. So I'll start these videos so you can get a look of El Cap and the valley below within Yosemite. And then you'll have the falls, upper and lower Yosemite Falls. And then as it comes up, you'll get to see, and then I'll start the other one here. You have Half Dome here, and then you have Nevada Falls, Vernal Falls over here. Just spectacular. The must-do hike, Sentinel Dome. Add it to your list. And then this is from the valley, a view of Half Dome, and then we hiked out to Mirror Lake. Now I will point out, so here in Yosemite, because of COVID, they weren't running shuttles, so it was a lot of walking, and so with shuttles, it would make it a little easier from getting one point to another, but it was a lot when the shuttles are closed. So this was a little bit of a challenge during COVID, but nonetheless stunning and beautiful. So now from Yosemite, we started making our way. That was the furthest point west. So now we start making our way east and slowly making our way home. Stopped in Sedona. We were here for a week. Lots to do. We stayed at the Rancho Sedona RV Park. This is the RV park itself. Sedona's just so much to do, hiking, lots of hiking. And as we were getting close to the end of our stay, fire season was really picking up. So this is smoke from a fire, and it wasn't long before we left here before they started to get their monsoons and flooding. But here's some of the hikes. This is our hike out to Devil Bridge. Here's another view along the hiking trail as we made our way to Devil's Bridge, and then Devil's Bridge itself. What you don't see here is, here's the bridge itself. It's kind of hard to see, but it's kind of like an arch. And then what you don't see is the line that takes an hour. If you wish to get your picture out on this, you can. I managed to grab the shot between people coming and going, but there was a line all the way along this ridge for people to wait to stand out there and get their photo. So that was an eye-opener, but managed luckily to get this shot in Sedona. Then we made our way to the Petrified Forest, and well, sometimes you just got to upgrade your campsite to a patio, and we did that and enjoyed our time at the Holbrook KOA, and we went to Petrified Forest National Park, which was nice. We had seen, obviously at this point, a lot of national parks where you can spend a lot of days hiking an entire day. This was a park that you can just drive, and there was a couple hikes that we did, but easily we did this in 4 hours. And it's definitely right off Interstate 40, so it's definitely worth going to, especially if you're passing through the area and you just have, if you have time, certainly stop, because you can drive right through the park and see a lot. And it was amazing. I've never seen petrified wood like this, complete trees. And then all throughout the desert, this is all scattered petrified rock throughout the desert. And this was, I had to get this picture. This was actually a tourist stop where you can buy petrified rock. And they had this old Mercedes with the giant tree petrified rock in it. So I thought it was funny. My sense of humor, I don't know, but anyway, this is Blue Mesa Overlook. We were able to hike down into this valley here. And as I mentioned, just throughout this area, see where my pointer is, all of this scattered petrified wood that is in here. And there's more of it buried under here that will, over time, this land will erode due to rain and wind and expose more petrified rock throughout the area. Pretty interesting. And then we made our way to Monument Valley. This was a place that I just wanted to go. I've seen the pictures and I just had to go. So that was another beautiful thing about RV travel is we had the time, 3 months, and we added it to our list. Now, again, I'll bring up COVID. We couldn't actually get onto or into Monument Valley because that's actually located on Navajo Nation land. And because of COVID, they had closed the Navajo Nation, and you couldn't get into this particular area because it's was on Navajo land, which they closed. So we had to come up with Plan B, which was not too hard to do because there's so much to see out here. So we drove out to Mexican Hat, which is this landmark here. So from the road, you can take this dirt road and hike out to Mexican Hat. And these were just some of the scenic stops that we saw as we made our way there. And actually, we drove out to Gooseneck State Park, which I'll show in the next slide, and to Valley of the Gods, which thankfully I have a truck and 4-wheel drive. I don't know if I would recommend doing this in the rain because this can get quite muddy. Thankfully, the weather was good. I saw cars driving on this road, but this was about I'm trying to remember, it was 17 miles, I think is what it was, of backcountry road. And took probably an hour and a half to do because we were stopping a lot and taking photos, but it was worth it. I mean, the photos that you got were incredible. And some people, from what I read from reviews, say that this ride is better than actually going into Monument Valley. So you always have to be flexible. Things don't always work out the way you want. And this was Plan B, which turned out to be quite all right. And then this is Gooseneck State Park, which you drive out to, and $5 to get in the park. And actually you can camp there. And then this is the San Juan River that snakes its way through, and thus you get this gooseneck. So add it to your list if you have an opportunity. It's a very beautiful area. And now we made our way to Ouray, Colorado. So we're getting close to the end here and close to the end of our trip. We drove out to Ouray, another place that we had heard of through watching other RV YouTube people who had highly recommended Ouray. It's known as the Switzerland of America. Turns out that my very first boss from 30 years ago lives in Montrose, which is not far, who offered to drive us up into the mountains in his Jeep. And I took him up on that opportunity because you drive up on old mining roads up into the mountains of Ouray. And we climbed up to highest elevation was 12,226 feet. And I'm glad I did not have to do that. He did it and took us up, and it was spectacular. So if you're not familiar with the area, research Ouray. Certainly if you're going to come out here on bringing an RV, a word of caution and do your research. There's this road called the $1 Million Highway that goes from Durango through Silverton and into Ouray. Pretty scary highway. A lot of RVers avoid it. I was able to avoid it by going a different route. So keep that in mind. The $1 Million Highway. If you have a fear of heights and you don't like big drop-offs and driving on a narrow road with an RV, you want to stay off that highway. So do your research. Got to see moose and then obviously some outstanding scenery. This is another view of Ouray from the drive. The color comes from iron in the rocks, and that's how you get this red color in the rock formations and in the landscape. I think this is July, so as you can see, we still have snow, and This was in the July timeframe. And then while we were in Ouray, we were so close, and I was trying to hit off as many national parks as possible. This is Gunnison National Park, which was probably 45 minutes from where we stayed in Ouray. And we just did a quick drive in and got some photos from some overlooks. And then we made our way to Gunnison. We stayed at a KOA in Gunnison. This area was recommended by my boss, who I mentioned earlier. And we stayed overnight here for 4th of July and got to go to Crested Butte and then downtown Gunnison for the 4th of July celebration. And another beautiful thing about RV travel or just travel in general is sometimes you just find those places that you say, I could live here. And I think this was one of the places that my wife and I had to stop and pause and say, oh, we could definitely live here. This is some of the landscape. This is a trail we drove out to this point, and Judd Falls Trailhead. It was packed. We weren't able to actually get a spot, so we had to pull over to the side and get this photo. But Crested Butte should be on everyone's list. Spectacular. And now we made our way to Denver. This was our last destination. This is Aurora State Park, right in the city. I mean, this Aurora is 10 minutes from downtown Denver, and this beautiful state park, probably the biggest campground we had on our trip. And while we were here, as I mentioned in the very beginning, my aunt lives in Denver, so we visited her for the week. We went into Rocky Mountain National Park, got to see more moose, and of course, stellar views of Rocky Mountain Park. Here's another and another of Rocky Mountain. And then from there, we just took like 4 days and made our way east as we headed home, stopping in Oklahoma. And actually, we stopped in Casey, Illinois, because I was so impressed. And I think about the journey, if I think back about our journey, I think Casey, Illinois being close to one of the first stops, and just finding the unexpected with those world's largest rocking chair and so on and such forth, that I had to stop there again, and we did before we ended up making our way home. But that's the trip. Covered a lot of ground. I hope you found the information helpful, useful, inspiring. These are some of the resources that I use for trip planning, for RV trip planning, certainly for in the beginning stages when we were looking for an RV, trying to figure out what we wanted. I went to RV Trader to get ideas on pricing, what's the going rate. Great resource. So I don't know if anyone's ever shopped for an RV, but it's unlike car buying. It's probably worse. So know your pricing, have an understanding of what you want. Don't expect to get everything you want. And I would strongly encourage you, don't make it an impulse buy. But at the same time, don't put it off, saying, I'm going to wait till I find that perfect RV, because I don't know. I feel blessed and fortunate that I think we found our perfect RV right off the bat. We bought something with no slides, 25 feet, kind of light, easy to get into and out of national parks. With no slides, you have less mechanical movement, so you don't have to worry about potential failures. So do your research, find out what you need, understand towing capacity for vehicles and the weight of your RV, and then make sure you do your research on pricing. The national parks, nps.gov, definitely you have to use that to one, be inspired and find out what hikes and what's available for camping. Recreation.gov is where you go to book all those campgrounds. Keep in mind, you got to book them as soon as they're released. I mean, do your homework beforehand. Figure out even what campground site number you want and get on immediately as soon as those campsites open, so you can get that site, because they'll book within 60 seconds, entire campground. So keep that in mind. I use for trip planning, I'm a planner. I've never towed anything. So for me, I had to have everything planned, campgrounds, gas stations. I may be a little crazy, but I never towed anything. So I didn't want to find myself in a gas station where I couldn't get out. So RV Trip Wizard was really a great resource for me. And I have a link on my website. If you go to savvytraveler.com, I have an affiliates link. You click that tab and you'll take you to the website. But I only recommend it because I've used it and I love it. It is an annual membership, but you can put in radiuses, gas mileage, and you can figure out where you're going to end up in a given day based on the inputs that you put in. It'll show campgrounds, and it's a very good tool. Campendium, the Dirt are good sites for finding campgrounds. And I mentioned Google Maps. You can pretty much find anything in Google Maps. That's another tool. All Trails is a must for hiking. And when you get out to some of these destinations, you're going to want to have a downloadable offline version, because a lot of times you won't have Wi-Fi or cell coverage. So pay up if you're going for a long trip and you're going to do a lot of hiking. Get the subscription and you can download your trails. And I mentioned inspiration from YouTube, Keep Your Daydream, Traveling Robert, RV Miles, Finding Your Someday. Actually, I should add on here, Adventures of A and K. Our last trip, I think, was all based on Adventures of A and K. So definitely that you'll get inspired by watching these people and watching their videos. Really good quality stuff. And you'll get ideas from campgrounds as well, like where to stay. And a lot of them have information on, like U-Ray, and things to be aware of and roads to stay away from. So keep that in mind as you plan your trip. So thanks for your time. Again, this was our first trip, 2021. You saw the map and the route. In 2022, we did it again, but we did the Pacific Northwest. We drove up and did, we did a lot. We drove all the way out to Crater Lake, stopping along the way between here and there at Tetons. We went to Wyoming, we did Glacier, we did Theodore Roosevelt, we did the Badlands. So if there's any questions, you can go to my website. I have an email. Feel free to do that as well. So with that, I'll open the floor. I'll take a look at the chat.
I just want to say here, Brian, what an excellent program this is, not only visually, but all the information that you've given. I was sort of hogging those questions. So if somebody has questions and wants to turn their audio on, please, by all means, ask.
Yeah, so actually I see a couple that had come in and these, okay, so maybe you had asked these, Diana. From a vehicle perspective, I did buy a used truck. I bought a 2017 Chevy Silverado. So that was used, but the camper I did get new. And I was fortunate enough again to buy it pre-COVID price. So I was able to get a decent price on a new camper. So that's from the camper perspective. I had considered used, but I just felt more comfortable going with new. And then from a camera, a lot of the photos are, well, 50-50, or I have a 35 millimeter Nikon camera, and then I use my phone, my iPhone.
Nice. What was the most challenging part of the towing and being on the road?
Yeah, so as an RVer, some of the things you have to be aware of is wind, and that can be a bit of a challenge. And so each day I would, or prior to leaving from one destination to another, I'd check the weather. So whether it's going to be high winds or heavy rain, you just have to be aware of these things because you're 45 feet long. So you have to take your time. We tried not to travel a lot of distance in any given day. We would typically travel 4 or 5 hours a day. It can get pretty stressful and tiring. So we try to leave campgrounds by 9 and arrive at the next campground by 2, no later than 3. So those were some of the challenges and suggestions is don't overdo it. Our last trip in 2022, we did a lot of miles those first 4 or 5 days to get out to the Badlands, and it was exhausting and tiring. And we told ourselves, we'll never do that again. And I don't know why we didn't learn that from our first trip, but we would have done it more slower.
Good to know. Anybody have any questions for Brian? Comments, anything? Brian, this was
guess
tremendous. I'm going to be circling
Yeah.
back to get other programs with you.
Sure. Yeah. As I mentioned, I actually just completed and did my first presentation 2 weeks ago at our local town library here in Amherst of our second trip. So whenever you're ready, whenever you're interested, I just finished that and we had a good turnout 2 weeks ago on that presentation. And again, that was all the way out to Crater Lake, hitting Glacier and Yellowstone. So and Yellowstone, we hit during the 1,000-year flood. So
Wow.
it was always have to have plan B. So that was an interesting time. So yeah.
Well, seeing no other questions, I want to say a huge thank you to you and thank everybody for joining tonight. And I'll wish everybody a lovely evening and a lot of comments now coming through. Thank you. This was informative. So terrific. So thank you, Brian, and thank you, everybody. And I'll say good night.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.